A group of unarmed militants have left the besieged enclave of eastern Ghouta in Syria through humanitarian corridors. This comes after talks brokered by Moscow. This video shows the militants leaving the area through the exit route. They're being escorted out of the area by Syrian soldiers. RT's Daniel Hawkins has more.
Sudden development in Ghouta today, given the deadlock over the past weeks and months in the region. Two pieces of news coming out. So the first, a group of 13 unarmed militants and their families leaving the area through one of those Russian military, Syrian government-organised checkpoints, those safety corridors offered to civilians and fighters to leave the area should they wish to do so. Now, this is significant because prior to this, all offers by the Russian military and the Syrian government were rejected by rebel groups in the region, despite unverified video shown of flyers being dropped over the towns and the city in the area. No groups have taken up that offer so far, and civilians allegedly have also been prevented from leaving the area through those corridors because of shelling to those roads. Now, the other bit of news is that the Syrian rebel group Jaish al-Islam has issued a statement in which they've said they have taken the decision to release members of the terrorist group Al-Nusra, formerly Al-Qaeda in Syria, from prisons in Ghouta and transport them to a destination likely to be Idlib in the north of the country, one of the last major rebel strongholds in Syria. This echoes similar previous moves during the Syrian civil war, where rebels have been evacuated from places such as Idlib, such as Homs, other towns as well, under these ceasefire agreements, and moved up to Idlib province, thus allowing the Syrian government to move in, take over the area and avoid long, protracted conflict causing more bloodshed. We don't yet know if the statement from Jaish al-Islam and these rebels leaving the area are linked. We don't know what group they're from. Either way, though, this does mark a significant development and could leave the door open to a wider evacuation of rebel fighters and civilians from the area in the coming future.
Well, earlier on Friday, a UN humanitarian convoy finally managed to enter eastern Ghouta. The aid supplies had been delayed by heavy fighting as government forces battled terrorists there. According to the latest UN estimates, the fighting in eastern Ghouta has resulted in more than 100 deaths in 2 days. The United Nations also called on all parties in the conflict to end the violence. Red Cross spokesperson Ralph El Hadji says the people on the ground require a wide range of basic supplies.
The need of people remain massive. The needs are twofold, threefold, etc. You have medical needs, you have need for access to a good source of food, you need also access to clean water. You have all sorts of needs inside Ghouta. Today the priority remains medical help that we need to reach with people inside Ghouta, and food aid as well. What happened, 27,500 people, which the trucks on Monday and today were able to provide humanitarian aid to, are just a little percentage of the people who need humanitarian aid inside. Therefore, we're always ready once an agreement is reached between the parties to give us the security guarantees to go back inside and deliver more and more humanitarian aid. This could happen next week. If all parties agree again to allow us to enter. Despite the danger that we were facing, we were able to finish quickly and rapidly and able to go back. However, the danger was still present, and that shouldn't be a recurrence if we are able to reach an agreement between all the parties next week to return back to eastern Ghouta with more and more aid that we know is much needed inside.
Well, meanwhile, around 10 kilometres away, there are reports of more terror attacks on civilians. Fresh shelling from eastern Ghouta is hitting residential areas of the capital, Damascus. Russia's defence ministry says 2 people were injured in the attack. Similar assaults have been occurring on an almost daily basis since government forces increased pressure on the terrorists in eastern Ghouta, although some of the previous attacks have been far more deadly.
We were in the shop we're working. We heard a sound. We didn't know whether if the explosion was close or far away. We went outside and found people at the scene with injuries that would make anyone literally shudder.
Well, for more on this, we can now cross live to investigative journalist Rick Sterling. Rick, thank you very much for joining us. Well, as we heard there, a group of rebel fighters left the Ghouta area on Friday through the humanitarian corridor. But how much of a breakthrough is this in the overall peace effort?
I think it's a positive indication, and it's really a result of the advances that the Syrian government has made. They've reportedly taken about 50% of the whole eastern Ghouta area that was occupied by the armed militants for the past 4 to 5 years. So what we're seeing is this positive indication of the first group of terrorists or armed militants leaving. And another indication of that is that there's now credible video coming out showing civilians in the occupied areas openly, publicly protesting against the occupation by the armed militants. And so that they're welcoming the advance of the Syrian army. So I think these are positive indications of what's going on.
Well, let's look at some of the reaction. I mean, the US State Department dismissed Russia's plan for humanitarian corridors as a joke. I mean, why do you think Washington's unwilling to support this effort?
Well, they don't want to see the effort succeed, is what it boils down to. Sadly, they don't want to see the occupied areas, the terrorist groups expelled from the zone. We saw that in East Aleppo, and as soon as East Aleppo was actually liberated and the terrorists were all shipped out or were expelled, the Western media all fled as fast as they could. So they don't. Unfortunately, the West is continuing to support the terrorist groups that have been, raining havoc in Syria since 2011.
Well, let's also look at the consequences here. I mean, the Russian government is trying to persuade the remaining militants to leave Ghouta and head to Idlib province. But is there a danger that they'll simply rearm and cause trouble elsewhere?
Well, they have their base of operations in Idlib, and clearly the strategy of the Syrian government and their allies is to remove the terrorists from the more populated areas and get them all concentrated in Idlib and deal with that down the road. It's tremendously positive to remove the terrorists from around Damascus. Damascus has grown by 35% in the course of this conflict to be a huge city now, because many civilians who had to flee, whether it's from East Ghouta or Hama or Homs or some of the other cities, they ended up in Damascus. So it's a densely populated city that's had mortars and hell cannon missiles coming into it on a nearly basis, which I witnessed myself and which your previous video portrayed.
And finally, Rick, I mean, looking at the siege of East Ghouta, that's been going on since April 2013. I mean, do you expect the Syrian government to regain control over the area over the coming months?
It may take less time than that, actually. The fact that in 2 or 3 weeks they've recaptured 50% is a positive sign. Now that's more of the farming area and the smaller villages. So the remaining 50% that's still controlled by the terrorist groups is the more urbanized area, and that'll be tougher going, I expect. But the news today about some terrorists leaving the area, the news of public protests by civilians in those areas against the occupying militants are positive indications.
Indeed. At that point, we'll leave it. Rick Sterling, investigative journalist, thank you very much.